All right, here we go. Hello, everyone out there in Facebook or wherever you might be. I'm Mitzi Szereto, and I'm here again for a Facebook Live event. This is for my new book release, The Best New True Crime Stories, Well-Mannered Crooks, Rogues, and Criminals. And I am joined today from Canada by Janel Comeau. Hi, Janel.
Hi.
How are things in Canada?
So far, so good. It's the goodest place to be right now with everything going on. This is a pretty solid place to be.
Well, you're in the Maritimes, right? I think you guys have been in a bit of a bubble, which I hope continues for your sake.
Yeah, we kind of got to skip the pandemic. It's kind of been life as usual plus masks here, so.
Yeah, well, I saw on CBC News it was like you put the castle fortress, the gates down. So no, if you're not from this province, you're not allowed in. Go away.
Yeah, nobody in or out for the last, I guess, year and a half now. Wow.
Yeah, I think that may be the way to go. I mean, they've done it at all the border crossings, obviously. I don't know when that's ever going to open. That's, I'm in an area where we have lots of cross-border back and forth. People were always bouncing back and forth, and then obviously trade and it's amazing the amount of stuff that I buy and it's made in Canada. So it's like, and now they want to go on strike, the truckers, when the border opens. No, not the truckers, the border guys.
Oh yeah, I bet. It's been a whole, I was going to say it's been a year, but it's been closer to 2 now. We're closer to 2022 than not.
I think we just need to put a check mark through 2021 and just forget it at this point. Oh dear. Well, I'm so glad you were able to join me today. You've written a really interesting story for the book, a one-way ticket to Poitiers. Or is it Poitiers? Am I saying it right?
I've never been quite clear on that, honestly.
Well, there's a good reason.
Yes, I've got it here. Yeah, I don't speak Spanish, unfortunately, and this is a story that takes place mostly in Latin America, so I'm sure I've butchered. I'm glad I didn't have to say the names out loud, because I really don't know how they're said, but Poitiers, one of the two.
Yeah, actually, I was sort of making it a bit of a French pronunciation, which other than your name, I don't know why I thought it was French. It's like, duh,
It was never a real country, so I'm not sure the pronunciation
I know.
Is terribly important.
I know, that's totally weird. Well, I just sent a comment to someone. Hi, Chris is tuned in here. I love it when people start saying, we're here. So what was it about this particular case, before we get into the nitty gritty of it, but what was it about this case that actually sparked your interest to research it and write a piece about it?
So I've run my own true crime podcast. I run a true crime podcast with
yourself.
Yeah, with Vancouver-based comedian Jessica Pigeot, who I went to undergrad with. And we mostly focus on historical cases because we didn't want to get sued, so we figured we would do cases where everybody was dead.
I hear you on that. Yeah.
For legal reasons, it's much easier to do these cases when everybody has died. You can kind of say whatever you want, and you can speculate as wildly as you'd like to. So we kind of focus on historical cases, and I came across this case of Gregor McGregor, and it's a very long and very involved story that involves a lot of Central American politics, but I really like that it was a story where it was it's a crime story. Everything that happened was criminal, but it was kind of a break from your typical murder, serial killer, that kind of thing. So I thought it was an interesting story. This gentleman who always wanted wealth and status, so he just sort of pulled off this incredibly brazen scam, inventing his own country, making himself the king of it, and then scamming people out of their life savings to live there. So I thought it was an interesting story, and when I first came across it, I was sort of surprised that I had never heard of it before and that it wasn't more well known. And then I came across this anthology series that was taking submissions, and I figured it would be a good fit for that because he was trying to be noble and a gentleman and killing people in the process.
Yeah. We'll get into the killing in a minute, because that's what everyone's interested in, you know, the bloodthirsty people. No.
Yes.
You mentioned the historical time period. Then when are we talking about for this case?
So Gregor MacGregor was born in 1786, and he kind of got into the thick of his scamming in his 30s. So this is kind of the turn of the 20th century is sort of when we're talking about. I can't recall exactly when the first ship set off for Poyais, but this is at a time in world history where there's a lot of talk about the New World. People are very excited to head from Europe into the New World, and there's a lot of upheaval in Latin America as well, which makes it hard to keep track of what countries exist at any given time. So
yeah, you did a good job of that, because I mean there were places that were part of somewhere else, then they became someplace else again, and then, you know, back and forth. Although I think historically we always see that where borders are annexed, and then, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, with my heritage as well, being Hungarian, you know, it's like the Romanian, Hungary, you know, Hungary. She's like, no, that's my soil. No, that's my soil, and it just goes on and on. But yeah, you did definitely a cracking job about, you know, kind of for people who aren't like hardcore history people or geographers. You gave a really good overview to make it understandable and not dry.
Good. That was the goal, because there's a lot.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about Gregor MacGregor. Obviously, he's not from Latin America or South America, not with that name.
No. So he's Scottish, and he's born into the Clan MacGregor in the late 1700s, at a time when they were sort of disgraced. They had been banned from using their name. They had tried to rebel against the government. And so they had kind of fallen out of favor. So Gregor MacGregor is born into this family, and his whole thing, his entire life, is that he wanted to be part of high society. He wanted to be somebody. So he tried buying his way. His parents bought him a rank in the military, in the British and Scottish militaries, which you could do at the time. You could sort of just buy your way. If you didn't want to be a lower officer and you had money, you could buy your way into the upper ranks of the military. It was not a meritocracy. But that didn't do anything for him, because everybody else was doing the same thing. And when that kind of failed to pan out for him, he couldn't make his way into high society. He heard that Venezuela was going through a bit of a time where they were rebelling against, they were Spanish controlled at the time, and they were rebelling against the Spanish occupiers. And he figured that he bet that they were going to win, that the revolutionaries were going to win. And he figured that if he went down there to help General Francisco Miranda, the famous revolutionary general, that could be his claim to fame. He would go, he would have all these adventures in Latin America, and then he could come home to Europe, and with all of these stories about how he single-handedly won the revolution, and everybody would accept him. And that was sort of his plan. And then he got there, and it went terribly. Pretty much from the start. So he had one big military success that kind of was, he successfully led this retreat and saved all of his men, and it was enough for them to start entrusting the Venezuelan revolutionaries to start trusting him. And he pretty much bungled everything else they ever asked him to do. So they, on several occasions, he abandoned his men when they were under attack, and they all died. So but since he was the only survivor of these incidents, he kind of got to say what happened. So he was able to kind of scam his way into not only surviving, but to continue to collect Venezuelan military honors. And eventually, sort of everybody else had died, and he was hiding out in Haiti. And he decides, as you do, and with his family, he had shipped his wife and kids off to Haiti. And he decides he wants to now become the ruler of his own country. He's now spectacularly failed at being a military person. At one point, he led a failed attempt to invade Florida. And
as one does, yeah.
Florida was, I don't know if, I'm Canadian. I don't know how much Americans know about the history of Florida, but it was a contested territory for a long time. Spain did not want to let go of Florida. So So he decides he goes out to what was then called the Mosquito Coast. This was the Mosquito people, or I'm sure I'm butchering this, but they lived along the coast of what is now Honduras and Nicaragua on that Atlantic coast. And he asked to buy a 8 million acre piece of land from them in exchange for some jewelry and rum and some goods that he'd accumulated. And they said, sure, because this was uninhabited jungle. They didn't want to live in it. It was largely uninhabitable. It was a hostile place to try to live. Nobody lived there. So they said, sure, we'll take your goods and you can have our 8 million. The land today is a bird sanctuary. Even today, there's nobody lives there. So they said, sure, take our uninhabited jungle coast, do whatever you want. We have no idea why you want it, but sure. So he takes it and decides this is now the country of Poyais. And he declares himself Cazique, which is a word from some of the locals' vocabulary that means native chief. And he decides, I'm now the ruler of a country. None of this is true. He just basically bought a piece of land. It's like buying a piece of land today and declaring yourself king of a country. But he decides to capitalize on the fact that people in the old world know nothing about the new world, and that Venezuela and Latin America, countries and borders are changing every year. So he goes over there and says, okay, I am now the leader of a country called Poyais. The locals granted it to me and they recognize me as their chief, which is not true. And it is a paradise. It is the best country in the world. He's claiming to people that literally if you look into the rivers, you can just pull up handfuls of gold. There's big fat pieces of gold in there. The locals just, don't have any use for the gold, so they don't know. He claims that you can grow cash crops like sugar and cocoa, and without any effort, you just throw the seeds and they will grow. He claims there's fruit trees and it's a paradise and you can basically make yourself very rich with no effort. And he claims as well that he has developed this beautiful country there. He says we have an opera house, we have parliament, we have some of the most advanced human rights on earth. All men are equal and everybody gets to vote. And that was very revolutionary. It's like 1810 when he's doing this. He says we have ports and merchants, and we have a cathedral that we've just finished building. So he hires people to sell this vision all across Europe and to sign up immigrants. And he's got his, you can get your land grant, and he went as far as making up currency and banknotes and stamps. Like he was LARPing this pretty good. It was like a D&D campaign for him. He had all the stuff to go with it. He's got the stamps and with his own face on them, naturally. And he sells it, and people start, Europe. This is the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So it's not a fun time to be poor in Europe. It's not a fun time to be lower middle class in Europe. So they start selling everything they own to buy tickets to Poyais, and he managed to sign up something like 8 full shiploads of immigrants, hundreds and hundreds of people. And they start taking off for Poyais, and when they get there, they're basically just dumped off the ship on the beach, and they realize they have been stranded in a jungle. There's no city. There's no nothing. They've just been dumped in the jungle to die. And he had no plan for any of these people. He was in Europe, still touring around, parading around, pretending that he's there as a guest of the king, selling all of these land grants, and boats and boats of people are leaving. And eventually the locals in Nicaragua, Honduras, the people who live there kind of stumble across this colony of dying white people on the beach in Nicaragua, and are like, what the heck? Like, what are you doing here? Why are there hundreds of people here? And they eventually figured out what he had been up to, and they communicated with authorities in Europe to try to turn these boats around. But many of the early settlers died. I think of the 200, 300 people who settled there initially, only 50 survived the ordeal. So quite a few people died because there was just nothing, there was no infrastructure, and they came completely unprepared to live in a Honduras jungle. These were people who lived in London and Edinburgh in 1810. They were not prepared for this. So this eventually became he was arrested, McGregor, on fraud, but he did manage to lie his way out of it. He basically said, well, I thought there was a country there. My advisors must have told me wrong. And sure enough, he was acquitted. They weren't able to prove that he didn't know there was a country. So he ended up returning to Venezuela. His military pension was reinstated, and he lived out the rest of his life a very rich man in Venezuela with full military honors. So there's no justice in this story.
You know, I mean, this is really the quintessential con man. I mean, you know, I mean, we have so many, you know, there's so many con men, and there have been historically, but I mean, to actually sell a country that doesn't actually even exist, and to do it again and again and again, you know, that's pretty brilliant.
Yeah, it's apparently it entered the kind of the popular vernacular for a while because people did copycat schemes.
Of course, as they do.
They do, as they do. So poyers became kind of a term that meant scam, like the equivalent of I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. It was known kind of because it became a copycat scheme, and then European countries became, at that time you often needed an exit visa to leave a European country. They became very careful about making sure that the countries you were getting an exit visa for existed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be helpful. Yes. Exactly. No, if I'm correct, you've got a bit of a criminology background, right? Academically,
I do. I didn't study criminology, but I studied forensic psychology. So I have a master's in forensic psychology, which was
better yet, because that kind of brings me to my question about Gregor McGregor. I mean, are we talking psychopathy here, or opportunist, or a combination of both? Because this guy seems to have gone off the charts.
It's hard to say. I mean, there's not a lot of surviving correspondence that kind of talks about what he was actually like. It's hard to say if he was believed his own stories, or if he, you know, if he was aware of how much a scammer, because this wasn't the only scam he did in his life. He used military titles that he had never earned. He styled himself as Sir Gregor McGregor, and that was never a title he was granted. Whenever he purchased a military rank, he would often just bump it up a couple. So it's hard to say if he really thought that if this was delusions, if he really thought that he was this great man with all these military honors, if he was just kind of full of it and understood that he was full of it. I think we all know somebody who's kind of full of tall tales, and sometimes it's a mix of both, where they're sort of, it's wishful thinking. And it's hard to say if he ever really felt remorse for what he had done. He didn't really, there's not a lot of writings where he's reflecting on the fact that many, many people died because he ditched them on a beach in Nicaragua. So it's hard to say. Could be a real narcissist or
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, we have serial killers, and they, you know, that's pretty straightforward business, being a serial killer. But I mean, in a way, you can almost say he's like a serial killer, because so many people died as a result of his actions, whether it was this land scam, the country, the fake country, or his military activities, right? I mean, didn't he leave like tons of corpses of his military men?
Oh yeah, he abandoned quite a few men to die. He's got a much higher body count than most of history's serial killers, if you add it all up. But he always kind of had an out. He was kind of, he had a way to distance himself from all of this, that, you know, it wasn't my fault, I didn't know, or so he never really took responsibility for any of the things that he did.
No, it certainly doesn't sound like it. So you said so his scams did yield him money. I mean, obviously he's selling the land deeds or whatever in foyers, so he made money from that.
Oh yeah, he made money from that. He kind of tried to, he had some money from his family. They had some money in land. But he made significant amounts of money selling land in foyers. People were selling everything that they owned. They were selling businesses that they'd run for generations. They were selling land they had owned since time immemorial. And he did get to keep some of that money. And then when he was sort of caught, he fled to Venezuela and was able to successfully argue that he deserved a full military pension, which was quite generous, and he got it and lived on that until he died in his 50s. I don't think we really know what he died from. He died from being in your 50s in the 1820s. Yeah,
at that time, I don't think you had a really long life.
You really knew. But no, he never wanted for money. He was never, and he didn't really need to do this to get money. His family had money. It was more about the status. It was more that he wanted to be somebody great, and he was very slighted by the fact that that high society was not interested in him and looked down on him. That was a real bee in his bonnet, apparently. He needed that status and the titles and it was more about the title, and it was more about being the king of this great country and the fantasy that he created.
Wow. So, I mean, it's just interesting to me to think that, you know, the military honors that he kept getting, when the fact is he's got, like I said, a bunch of corpses left on the beach that were the men he was supposedly leading in battle. I mean, how could no one have like said, something smells funny here?
Well, there was one instance where his men were sort of attacked while they were stationed somewhere out in the remote area, and the minute he detected trouble, he got in the closest boat and rowed away. he commandeered boats. He did anything he could to flee these situations and just sort of left the men to their fate, which was usually death. So he not a man known for his bravery.
No, but he just seemed to keep coming and he like kept remaking himself. I don't know. It's you hear about people remaking themselves, but he did it many times at different places. And
oh yeah, and this is the 1810s. You know, there's not a lot of news is slow to travel in the 1800s. Yes. So if he goes back to Europe and he's telling his glorious war stories about all of the victories he's won, fact checking that is very difficult. So yeah, and especially when it's in a different you're on the other side of the equator or near the equator, and then it's just like, you know, over in Britain, they're like, what? You know, never heard of it. Yeah, they had no reason not to believe him. So you would never expect someone to be so brazen, and he took full advantage of that.
Didn't he also marry a woman who had quite a substantial dowry early on in his career?
Yes, he married a very wealthy woman who also had some social connections, but it appears that her social status would transfer to him, and that wasn't the case. Her family were not a fan. So he made anything he could do for money, status, fame. He was willing to do it. And then he dragged this poor woman all across the Caribbean, so...
Oh my God! Yeah. So was she there for the entire for his entire career, so to speak?
It's not clear. She did eventually take off. I guess she had enough of him at some point, but he seems to have stashed her in Haiti, which was sort of at that time not really a site of a lot of conflict. It was just sort of held by the French. So he kind of stashed her on an island and went to go play war for a couple of years, and then would periodically collect her and the kids and move on to the next scam. So since women's writings from that time, not a lot of them survive, and her perspective I wasn't able to find a whole lot of. I don't know how she felt about being
that would have been interesting to know what she thought of him. I mean, clearly, I mean, she must have seen what he was doing. How could you not, you know?
It's not clear if she believed him or what any of this was.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if he had a different story, a different spin on every story for everyone. Maybe she didn't know. I mean, it's not like, you know, you were going to question your husband back in that day, right? Whatever you say, dear. Oh no, it's just, I mean, the greed factor is extraordinary. I mean, we've had. I had a chat with Paul Willitson about his story too, and that too was just like, how much money does somebody need? You know, how many things do you need? How many crimes do you need to commit just to keep this money? I mean, there's only so much you can spend and accumulate, and it seems like for some people, there is no end in sight. They just, I want it all. This is the Queen song, right?
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable that he felt he could get away with this. I mean, what was the end game here? People were going to notice there was no country when they got there. Was the plan to just keep sending people there until they built one? I really don't know what the goal was. If he just didn't care what they did, or if he figured that they would make a country that he could rule. It was really not clear what the end game was, but this doesn't seem like a sustainable scam.
No. Well, if they, you know, you said that there was a shipload of people coming from Europe, and then the other shipload was already en route, and then they're like trying to tell the second shipload, turn around. There's no
country.
God. Oh, and this area where they were all being sent, this is rather harsh territory, isn't it? If I'm correct.
It's uninhabited. Uninhabited. It's Central America. It's and the area is jungle basically. It's even at that time there were not a lot of it took a while to notice because there was no indigenous settlements there at the time. Like even they didn't live in this piece of land. They had settled in more inhabitable parts of now Honduras and Nicaragua. So yeah, and like I said, today it's a wildlife sanctuary. It was never developed. It was never turned into human settlement. It's very harsh, apparently. You really can't farm or grow anything. It's very beautiful. It's very scenic, but the soil is very harsh. The terrain is very harsh, so you really can't go anywhere or grow anything. And if you're a settler coming in who's lived your entire life in the beginnings of industrial revolutionary Europe, you're not going to know.
No.
The jungle would be difficult if there was a city waiting for you. Well,
as far as how did he actually become aware of this land that, he just decided to buy all this land? I mean, this isn't exactly in his back garden, so to speak.
He was traveling a lot through Central America, kind of looking for. He'd been sent all through Central America, joining in this war against the Spanish, who controlled most of the region at that time. How he actually became aware of this particular chunk of land, I don't know if it was for sale or if he just approached the Mosquito people and were like, "Hey, I'd like to buy a very large piece of land off of you." How he became aware. How he pulled it off is not clear, but he traded for it, not under the agreement that it would become its own country, just that he would own this land the way anybody owns any chunk of land. And when they found out what he had done with the piece of land, they did take it back. They reclaimed that piece of land. They were not impressed with what he had chosen to do.
No, and they also didn't want those settlers either. They basically showed them the door, right? They weren't too sympathetic.
Well, they did try to nurse them back to health because they did one of the boats that came to drop off settlers kind of noticed that there were some sickly looking people on the beach and
mildly.
But local authorities kind of got involved and they did try to nurse these people back to health because many of them had fallen victim to malnourishment and disease and just heat exhaustion and all kinds of things. They were in pretty rough shape, but most of them didn't survive. And even the trip from what was Poyes to a more developed part of what's now Honduras, and then not all of them survived the trip back to Europe. So they did ship them home. There was nothing for them in Central America, and they'd arrived totally unprepared to live in Central America. But yeah, very few of them made it back. And but some of them did take McGregor's side, which is interesting in later things, saying that, oh yeah, because he wasn't there, he didn't know, he was tricked by his advisors. So this guy was apparently quite charming. He was quite charismatic. He apparently had a real gift for winning people over to his side, even when he was scamming them.
Yeah, I was shocked by that in the story that there were people who were his victims who basically were justifying what he did and that, hey, he's an okay guy. I mean,
yeah, even making him out to be a victim who that he had been duped by his staff and his advisors and claiming that he was a victim too, which was interesting because he very much wasn't. No.
I mean,
this whole thing.
if it maybe one time you could say, "Whoops, I didn't know," but when you keep, selling this country and again, and he didn't just do it in the United Kingdom, like in London, and he also went over to France, right?
He did, and that was another reason because England at the time didn't require exit visas, but France was having. For most of the last 300 years, France was having a bit of a time at the moment. That's been true of France for a long time. But they had very strict requirements on travel and on exit visas, and they kind of noticed, hey, we're issuing a lot of visas to this Poyes country. So they kind of ceased issuing exit visas till they could figure things out. So it did save a lot of French lives in the end. Was their own attention to where their people were going. England didn't care so much. You could just get on a boat.
That's not very good, is it?
No.
Oh, well, Yeah, obviously this is a serious crime case. You know, I mean, we're talking many people died as a result of Gregor McGregor's actions. But there is an element in this, as you read the story, there is some humor in there. And I mean, they're horrific situations, but you also highlight the imagery. For instance, when he was like rowing away from, you know, with the battle, and oh no, let me hurry, get back to this other boat. And did you find, because you were also a comedy writer, am I correct?
Yes.
So was that with the elements of humor in this particular case, you were able to hone in on those? You were able to actually see that?
Well, it's what kind of drew me to the case in the first place, because it's so brazen. It's so out of left field. Like, it's, you know, you scams have been around forever. I've gotten 4 calls about my car's extended warranty today. But scams tend to be manageable, like selling a fake country, selling hundreds of tickets to it, and then getting away with it it's so brazen. Like, just the scope of his crimes is almost what makes it. I mean, it's not funny, people died, but it is.
Yeah.
There's a comedic element to it that anyone would be so brazen as to do this. And to go as far with it as he did. He had diagrams, he had books written about this country and how great it was when you got there. He had pamphlets and stamps and banknotes, and the effort of this is exhausting. It almost would have been not much more effort to just make the country, you know?
Well, yeah, you mentioned that too. That just reminded me when he was with the Florida thing, where he was trying to sell Florida. But didn't he in Amelia Island, which I've actually been to, so I know where it was. But they produced Amelia dollars.
Yes, so he kind of had a practice run with Amelia Island, which is like a little island off the coast of Florida that I think is Floridian territory today. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Florida. It's actually it's just a little bridge that just takes you over to, I mean, that's all. It's just it's right there.
Yeah, it's kind of a speck of land that's not super valuable, and it never kind of has been in terms of agriculture or trade or military or anything. But yeah, he was kind of sent there as part of his operations in Florida, and he sort of tried to turn it into a colony and declare himself the leader of it and start making money, and then it all collapsed because when you print paper money that is not attached to anything, you can't do anything with it. So his troops sort of mutinied eventually because they weren't being paid. They were being paid in nothing.
Amelia dollars.
Amelia dollars. So he had one trial run running a fake country, and it went terribly. He was chased out of there. And so he went bigger. Instead of giving up, he decided to go even harder. 10 times the effort, 10 times the country. Which is fascinating. This guy failed everything he did. He basically failed at, and then he would try even harder and do it even bigger. When he wasn't successful in the British military, he tried to lead a revolution in Venezuela, a country he knew nothing about.
You have to admire him. I mean, they say don't give up so easily. I mean, he certainly never gave up easily.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say that he put no effort in. He put a lot of effort in to everything he did. He wasn't good at any of it, and he was lying about most of it. But he put a great deal of effort in everything that he did, from lying about his titles to his, like, every time he was bad at being a military leader, he would just try to get more authority, which is fascinating. You'd think the first time everybody died under your watch, you wouldn't try to then get more people under your command. But he did. And they died too. So...
Oh, I guess again he didn't quite learn from his mistakes, or he perhaps didn't even see them as mistakes, and his arrogance and his narcissism and his, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think we've had a lot of experience the last couple of years in very charismatic narcissistic leaders.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that since we started talking about Gregor McGregor. Yeah, it's ringing a lot of bells.
Parallel, but he didn't care that none of the things he said were true. They were true to him, maybe, but he didn't seem to be bothered by his own incompetence. He just wanted more authority.
Dear. No, it's certainly. And then you mentioned also in the story there was a couple of people that the average person would know. The South American, who was it? Was it Bolivar?
Yeah. If you're familiar with Central American revolutionary politics, which we don't learn a ton of in Canadian secondary school, I'll be honest.
No, it's not too common a subject. Yeah.
We don't share a border with any of these countries, so we don't tend to learn too much about them. But the first was Miranda, who was, I believe, killed at one point. I'm trying to recall. Yeah, Bolivar was kind of the big one that he fought under, who was a very, very famous general and revolutionary at the time. And he was eager to attach himself to all of these people because they were sort of known in Europe even. I don't know exactly what Spanish-English relations were like, but they seemed to be very in favor of the Spanish being overthrown. So they, there were a lot of very famous people who factor into this story because he sort of gravitated toward anybody famous, anybody with a big name, anybody he could use to brag about. It seems like his initial plan was just to go get a bunch of stories that he could tell at dinner parties in Europe and then impress people, and it seems to have snowballed.
And again, everybody just swallowed his spiel, it seems. I mean, you would think someone like Bolivar would be like clued in a bit.
I think they were just busy. I don't think they had time to deal with this. I think they had other things going on. I don't think anyone had time to kind of sit down and look at this random Scottish man who was running all over Central America. And he had an initial military victory that he seems to have milked for all it was worth. He led this very successful retreat through the jungle against all odds where he saved many, many lives. And he milked that for all it was worth for the rest of his life. And that was, he received military honors for that he held until he died. But yeah, I think he capitalized on the fact that everybody was too busy to pay attention to him. He was really just there to soak up any glory he could get and then skedaddle.
Well, I probably also, if you look at the time period this took place, perhaps they weren't as clued in about all these, con men as we are today. Like you mentioned about the your car warranty, or it's the Internal Revenue Service calling, or the Social Security Administration, or there's so many scams out there, and but back then maybe they would take people more at face value. Even Gregor McGregor. I
think a huge element of this story is just who would do this.
Yeah, who would even?
It's so far-fetched. Who would even think to do this?
Yeah, you couldn't make it up. Yeah, you really couldn't.
You really
can't.
If this was a fictional story, nobody would believe it. It would. Yeah, way too far-fetched.
Yeah, this goes beyond the thing about the swampland in the Everglades, or these. I got swampland in Central America.
It's just one thing after another. Nobody would believe that a man could fail upwards this many times, but he did. Or that anyone would be so brazen as to do any of this, but I think he capitalized on that.
Well, he obviously had some kind of charisma and credibility in his demeanor to qualify as a well-mannered
Apparently he was very charming. Apparently he was very charismatic, and people liked him very much, even
the ones he almost killed.
Yeah, everybody he couldn't make people hate him.
That's an achievement in itself. Yeah,
he is. It really is.
Oh dear. Well, it's an incredible story, and a crazy story. I mean, it really is pretty crazy. And I'm glad you were able to, write that for the book, because I think it was a little bit of a soft shoe away from endless murder, despite the fact we have a lot of corpses accumulating in the story. Not to make light of it, but I mean, it's just so it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not like an H.H. Holmes murdering people in the house, directly. He wasn't there when anybody died. He was thousands of miles away, but it was his fault a little bit.
Yeah, he didn't leave his DNA on all the dead people that he's responsible for.
He wasn't there, but he did. He did cause
highly instrumental in their demise.
Yes.
Oh, dear. Tell us about, do you have anything that you're working on you'd like to share? Any projects or?
I always have a lot of stuff on the go. I always have tons of stuff. I work on some other true crime stuff. I run a podcast called Histories and Mysteries with Jessica and Janel, which does, like I said, mostly historical crimes. We do a few modern here and there, but mostly things from pre-1960. So we've done some really interesting brazen stuff. We tend to cover more obscure things that we find. We did things like the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany and stuff that'll probably never be solved at this point. Although you never know. It seems like DNA technology is really shaking things up. But I do that kind of stuff. I write humor content for the Beaverton, which is like the Canadian version of The Onion. It's like a satirical news site, so I'm a contributor over there. And then I run a blog that I illustrate called All Wit, No Brevity, which is my own blog that I write and illustrate. It's not true crime. It's comedy. But yeah, I always have tons of stuff on the go.
Yeah. You sound as bad as me. There's this like don't know what direction. Yeah.
I always overcommit, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned about the unsolved crimes, because I'm actually working on the next what book is that? What number is that? Number 6 in the series. And so I'm not done with it. I'm still getting material in and talking to writers, but I keep saying, well, if it's too recent, by the time the book's out, it could be solved. You know, you have to kind of like weigh that issue. You know, what's going to happen if something is solved and in the meantime. Yeah.
It's a risk.
Yeah, it's always a risk. Then it's like, well, part 2, right?
Yeah, updates.
Go find all the books and put a note in there. Oh, by the way, they solved it.
Yeah, they figured it out.
Oh, dear. Well, I'm so glad you were able to come on today. And I've been speaking with Janel Comeau, and she has written an incredible story, true crime story called A One-Way Ticket to Poyais, about the famous Gregor McGregor. And that is in the best new true crime stories, yes. Well-Mannered Crooks, Rogues, and Criminals. Thanks, Janel. It was great talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.